Welcome back. North Korea and the United States are on parallel sides right now as concerns the North's nuclear program. Leader Kim Jong-un, obviously disappointed about America's unwillingness to shift ground on sanctions imposed, appears to have been making preparations to restart its nuclear activity.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo smiles a little as he passes a message to the North Korean government from the American president. Relations have been frosty since the U.S. President Donald Trump left Vietnam a few weeks ago without an agreement with his North Korean counterpart Kim Jong-un. Mr. Trump reported that Kim wanted the U.S. to remove all sanctions or else. Since then, scientists say they've seen satellite images indicating that the North may be preparing to restart its nuclear program. President Trump has said he would be very disappointed if this was the case. On Saturday, his Secretary of State said he expects Kim Jong-un to live up to his commitment not to resume nuclear and missile tests. This is based on a promise made in 2018 when the two leaders met for the first time in Singapore.
We are hopeful that we can continue to have conversation, negotiations. I saw the remark that she made. She left open the possibility that negotiations would continue for sure. It's the administration's desire that we continue to have conversations around this. As the president said when he was in Hanoi, the offer that they made simply didn't rise to the level that was acceptable given what they were asking for in exchange for that.
America is standing on its resolve that sanctions will remain until Pyongyang destroys all nuclear sites.
With respect to what was said last night about Chairman Kim potentially considering ending the moratorium, I can say only this. In Hanoi, on multiple occasions, he spoke directly to the president and made a commitment that he would not resume nuclear testing, nor would he resume missile testing. So that's Chairman Kim's word. We have every expectation that he will live up to that commitment.
North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Son-hui says North Korea has no intention to yield to the U.S. demands from the Hanoi summit in any form, nor is it willing to engage in negotiations of the kind. She also suggested denuclearization talks might end and testing could resume. She accused the U.S. of taking a gangster-like stance, adding that personal relations between the two supreme leaders are still good and the chemistry mysteriously wonderful. Neighboring South Korea has called on the United States to seek gradual denuclearization of North Korea as its all-or-nothing strategy will not help break an impasse in talks. Special advisor to the South Korean President Moon Chung-in said both sides were to blame for the breakdown of talks in Vietnam, but that the United States appeared to have suddenly toughened its stand and called for North Korea's complete denuclearization, despite earlier suggestions it might agree to a phased approach. He said the North could have got a deal if it had addressed U.S. concerns by making a commitment to abandon its uranium enrichment program at other facilities, not just at its main facility of Yongbyon. Some analysts think North Korea's push and pull with the United States must be in hopes that it will initiate a reaction from the U.S., especially as President Trump has boasted about his ability to get Kim to stop firing missiles and testing nuclear missiles.
The world responds as 49 people are killed in a terrorist attack in New Zealand. That and more are in other discussions in diplomatic circles. In Pakistan, vigils were held across the country as prayers were said and candles lit for the victims of the mosque attacks. 9 Pakistanis were among the 50 people killed at 2 mosques when a gunman opened fire on worshippers. The majority of victims were migrants or refugees from countries including Pakistan, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, Somalia, and Afghanistan. In India, they marched to express grief and condemnation at the killing.
Wherever a terror attack happens, we should condemn it, we should stand together, we should give strength to each other. The citizens, whoever comes from whichever religion, whichever region, we all should become like humane human beings lovers of peace.
Pope Francis offered his condolences to the Muslim community, saying, "In these days, added to the pain over wars and conflicts that do not cease to afflict humanity, there was added that for the victims of the horrible attack against 2 mosques in Christchurch in New Zealand." Turkish Vice President Oktay Fuat and Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu arrived in Christchurch on Sunday, where they met with the New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters to discuss the mass shootings. Meanwhile, relatives and friends have been mourning the loss of their loved ones. In other news, the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces says much of the Islamic State's last enclave in eastern Syria has already fallen, but there are still civilians, including women and children, still to be evacuated. SDF Field Commander Dia Raka says that IS shrinking territory is now only 2 kilometers in size. Thousands of people, the majority of the families of Islamic State fighters, had surrendered since the US-backed forces, led by the Kurdish YPG, laid siege to Baghouz and its hinterland on the Euphrates River. According to the SDF, among them were 5,000 militants. And finally, Mexico's border city of Ciudad Juarez, just across from Texas, is struggling to accommodate migrants who are awaiting their asylum applications to the U.S. to be processed. Local reports say some 1,300 migrants from Central America and Cuba are distributed across different shelters across the country. With migrant safe houses reportedly stretched to the limit, local authorities have set up temporary facilities near the international bridge connecting Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and El Paso, Texas. Asylum seekers have traditionally been granted the right to stay in the United States while their cases are decided by a U.S. immigration judge. But a backlog of more than 800,000 cases means the process can take years. The Trump administration announced a policy late last year that the United States will return non-Mexican migrants who cross the border back to Mexico while their asylum requests are processed, putting added pressure on Ciudad Juarez. Iran has announced it will be filing a legal case in the country against U.S. officials who imposed sanctions on the country as a precursor to action in international courts. The announcement was made by President Hassan Rouhani in a speech broadcast live on state television. He said the U.S. sanctions had created difficulties, including a weak real currency that has fed into higher inflation. China has issued a white paper on the fight against terrorism and extremism and on the human rights protection in northwest Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The government says it stands firmly against all forms of terrorism and extremism and is relentless in striking hard in accordance with the law as any conduct advocating terrorism and extremism and any action that involves organizing, planning, and carrying out terrorist activities or infringing upon citizens' human rights. For some time, China's Xinjiang, under the combined influence of separatists, religious extremists, and terrorists, has seen frequent incidents of terrorist attacks which have been detrimental to the life and property of people of all ethnic groups in Xinjiang and have trampled on people's dignity. A country under the rule of law, China respects and protects human rights in accordance with the principles of its constitution. This is where we end the program this week. Thank you again for joining us. I'm available on social media at Amarachi_Ubani and at Channels Television and at Channels TV. I'll see you next time. Take care now.